And the people that are homeschooling right now, they're raising the next leaders for the next generation.
Madelyn's going to be mad I use this word, but it's called epistemological self-consciousness. Why do I believe what I believe?
The textbooks that are being used in government schools that have been used for decades now, they're not neutral. You know, what they say about...
Now we know they were all published under Ghislaine Maxwell's dad. You know, it's
Exactly. It's like,
why?
These people aren't neutral.
The old phrase, more is caught than taught. Well, that applies to government school too. More is caught than taught. Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 2 of the Homeschool Freedom podcast. What we're going to talk about today is worldview in homeschooling. If you are a longtime homeschooler, this might be something you've heard before in conferences or read books about on the homeschool circuit. If you are new to homeschooling or the younger generation homeschooler or a first generation homeschooler, which is probably most homeschoolers, then this might be a new concept to you. So we thought we'd kind of lay some groundwork for you today. Just a quick by way of an introduction, my name is Emily Fort. I'm the executive director here at the Homeschool Freedom Coalition. We're joining you today with Madelyn Michels, who is our director of marketing. Madelyn, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself quick?
Yeah, so I was homeschooled K through 12. I care about this topic a lot. I worked at a homeschool curriculum company selling curriculum for a number of years. And so I got to meet a lot of people out on the homeschooling convention circuit. I got to really get to know homeschoolers, and I just love it. I love it very much. I care about these people, and the people that are homeschooling right now, they're raising the next leaders for the next generation. Like I believe that with all of my heart and soul, that it's going to be the homeschoolers that lead us into the next generation. So the worldview that we have and that we're taking with us into homeschooling really matters. And I think you have to kind of stop and remember that everybody has a worldview. You know, the teacher at your kid's school or your pastor or your friends, like nobody is just kind of sitting there watching. Everybody has a lens with which they see the world. And I think Charlie Kirk's assassination was a very obvious peek behind the curtain for a lot of people to see the worldview of a lot of government school teachers. I mean, there's never been a more obvious, these people actually believe this.
This is a worldview of death.
Yeah. It's like they're not neutral. They're not sitting there going, this is my job is to teach ABCs and I'm just going to kind of, let parents do their job. No, they have a worldview and they want to impose it on our kids.
I think the thing there is, so what people tend to do is Americans, as a rule, as a result of government education, but that's another point. Americans tend to be very individualistic in their thinking. So that teacher is a radical. That teacher is, pro some of this perverse stuff that we see in schools. You need to recognize every single human being on the planet has a worldview. And when you see a whole bunch of teachers saying the same stuff, we need to stop thinking about them individualistically and start thinking about them collectively as part of a worldview. A shared worldview there's a group of them, a bunch of them, probably thousands and thousands of them, that share a worldview that thinks that that's okay. And so it's identifying that people have worldviews and then identifying that they're not just everyone has their own individual, but when you see a lot of them sharing the same talking points, then you're getting away from individualistic thinking and you have to start thinking categorically. Okay, what is a worldview? Who has one? And what does it mean when we look at the worldview of government education? That's kind of where we're trying to get, I think.
Well, and I think something else is that, we've talked about this before, but, all these teachers that were fired after the assassination of Charlie Kirk, right? Everybody saw videos, everybody saw clips on social media of what they were saying in classrooms. And so we might think they exposed the real bad apples. Thank God they actually said it out loud. Somebody got it on camera because now they're gone. No, like you just said, Emily, this is a collective worldview that they share. The school administrations aren't surprised. They didn't go, oh, wow, I didn't know this teacher
Who
was
knew?
crazy.
I'm shocked.
Right? It's like, no, they knew also that they have to cover their back and they had to fire these teachers because they're already losing students every single day, right? And so if they didn't fire these teachers, they knew that the downfall was going to be even greater. They're going to lose even more. And so don't, like you just said, we can't sit and go, well, thank God, those bad people were exposed, because there's not just one or two, it's not just a few. And this is not the same world, of the 70s, 80s, and 90s, where you can just kind of hope that for the most part, everybody's good. For the most part, we all kind of share the same values. That's just not the case. I think it's very obvious now, especially with social media. You can see that's just not the case.
Right. So I getting to the worldview heart of this. So if everyone has a worldview, which they do, everyone looks at I mean, we've all seen this in our friends. We can watch the same news event and come to totally different conclusions and take totally different actions as a result of it. Why is that? Facts are facts, right? Well, facts are interpreted. That's what your worldview does. Your worldview watches a historical event happen on the news. Your worldview saw COVID, your worldview saw these things happen, and your worldview informs you and helps you interpret those facts and make conclusions about the world around you, make conclusions about your own life, what you should do, what you should believe. And so that's why you see such polarization, is we have people from one worldview looking at the facts and coming to totally different conclusions and thinking we need to take totally different actions as a result of it. And so we have to, okay, so there's two, like a couple of macro level points here. Number one would be, is anyone neutral? And I want to talk about that for a few minutes here in a second. The next thing is it behooves, and I like, if the Homeschool Freedom Coalition accomplishes nothing but this thing right here, I would consider my life well lived. It behooves every parent who is taking up the responsibility of trying to educate themselves and their children to think about their worldview. This is step outside of what you believe, above yourself, and recognize, why do I think what I think? Why do I see facts and interpret them a certain way? Why, when this historical event happened, did I assume this thing, which I now think is wrong? I have come a long ways. I now know that, I've learned so much since I became an adult. If you're in your mid-20s, what you thought at 17, you don't think anymore. And like, what happened there? Examining your worldview, becoming what they call, in the big philosophical term, Madelyn's going to be mad I use this, but it's called epistemological self-consciousness. Why do I believe what I believe? Why do I think what I think about every single social topic out there? And I'm talking, why do I think what I think about money? Why do I think what I think about marriage, about children, about parenting, about my spouse, about my in-laws, about every single topic? Why do I think that? If you came out of government education and you now realize with your own children what a dumpster fire that was, you have to take some time to analyze what you believe, why you believe it, and start to do the slow work of untangling a worldview that you were given when you were far too young to have chosen it. Okay. So you didn't, you hear this a lot about homeschoolers. Oh, they're just indoctrinating their kids. Yes, we all are. Every teacher everywhere, every parent everywhere is indoctrinating their kids, because by nature, you are shaping their worldview. So yes, we're indoctrinating our kids into whatever values our family, our textbooks, our worldview is. They are doing the exact same thing. They are indoctrinating our kids into whatever worldview their teachers, their textbooks, their people believe, their values. So it's not a question. So number one, macro picture, analyze your own worldview, see what it might be, who influenced it. Do you actually even believe half the fundamental principles behind it? A lot of government school graduates now turned, the last 5 years has seen a resurgence of young conservative families starting to homeschool, trying to get out of the cities, be self-sufficient, working community. Like, as you look back, the fundamental truths underneath most of what you believed are now obviously untrue to you. And so do some work to it will be work. I know adults in their 60s who will tell me these are like, people who read a lot and they're passionate about homeschooling, and they'll tell me I'm still unlearning stuff that I learned in government school, because they get you when you're so young that it just becomes like these foundational ideas. We don't want that. And so, number one, examine your own worldview and be in a constant state of self-examination on your worldview. And then number two, I think you're going to talk about this just briefly, Madeline, and I can give some examples. But we have to end this myth that education can ever be neutral. It's just not
right.
true.
Well, I think it kind of piggies back off of what you just said, Emily, where the textbooks that are being used in government schools that have been used for decades now, they're not neutral. What they say about
now we know they were all published under Ghislaine Maxwell's dad. It's
exactly. It's like these people aren't neutral. Education in general is not neutral. Everybody is raised with a set of values, whether good or bad. It's like you see somebody who is raised by a drunk father, and they go, everything in my life was affected by my drunk parents. Or like even my husband, he was public school his whole life, and he always says that everything that was happening in the school system, not just the books I was reading, but the way every class is timed and you're trained to go from class to class to class, that's all pre-planned ahead of time, right? That's all set out for a very specific reason. And as everybody
works.
Exactly. It's like, as everybody knows now, well, that's because they're training, workers. They're training people to clock in and clock out. And so when it comes to Christian education, or when it comes to home education, it's the same thing. You have your worldview. Your kids are picking up what you do day in, day out. We all know that, good or bad, right? They're always watching what we're doing.
It's the old phrase, more is caught than taught. Well, that applies to government school too. More is caught than taught.
Right, exactly. And so I think, sometimes people pretend like that's a bad thing, that your children are being raised to think like you. And we wholeheartedly disagree.
Yeah, exactly. That's what we're here for, man. That's
right. Like, if our kids are going to end up wildly different from us with a totally different worldview, like what happens in the government school, what's the point of all of this? And so you have to, remember it's a good thing, and to be very conscious of what you're doing, the curriculum that you're choosing. Who are the people that wrote it? That's worth a minute to stop and think, who actually made this in the first place? Because we all know who made the curriculum in the government schools, right? And so you can't detach those two things. And I think it is really the best part about home education, is that you're able to impart your values, your core beliefs, your family's values onto your kids. And that's just a huge, huge reason to do it and to get your kids out of the government school.
Right. And I want to make a couple of quick examples. If you are still wondering if government education is really neutral, they've really sold, we don't want to be dogmatic. We don't want this old, this ancient old ideas. We've really progressed. We're really enlightened. We've left behind the stuffy old stuff from an ancient old book. That's the nice way. The other radical ones will call it, the sky daddy, imaginary God.
And we've left gender behind. That doesn't exist. We're so enlightened.
Left this all behind. And we're neutral. And we let the kids decide. And a couple of examples would be these days, when you hear it's a literature class, for example, is reading, these postmodern novels that talk about, find your own truth. What's true for you? That's not neutral. That's humanism. That's a religion. Okay. That's a worldview. So to say, everyone has their own truth, what works for you might not work for me. That's humanism. It's very straightforward. That's not neutral at all. It sounds neutral. They've sold it as neutral, but really what it is secular humanism. You get to decide. You're the God of your system. You're in charge, not the God of the Bible, not anything people have believed historically. You, totally individualistic, again, get to decide totally arbitrarily based on your own life experience what all truth is for all time and all history. Like, how preposterous. That's not neutral at all. That's one of the most radical ideas in the world. I mean, imagine if people took that to their logical conclusion. I am the final arbiter of truth. I get to have my own truth and I get to do whatever I want as a result of my truth. Well, what happens when a whole bunch of them decide that their truth makes it okay to do horrifically evil, illegal things, like attack a bunch of school kids in a Christian school?
That's why we have furries, you know.
It's like that's not neutrality. When your kid is being taught everyone has their own truth, that's humanism, a specific worldview with specific tenets and a substitute religion. So it's not neutrality. Similarly, in science class, you'll see people, obviously evolution is a theory that is accepted whole cloth, right? But if you think that people have no creator, and then there is no created purpose in humanity, in man. So if you are the result of ooze and time, how could anyone impose any morality on you? Who's going to yell at a pile of ooze and say you ought not to do that? You don't get oughtness out of ooze, right? And so what that is, when you have that in a science class, that's not neutrality. That's atheistic materialism. That's a whole nother worldview. It has tenets of its worldview. It has adherents. It has people that advance it and write books about it to advance it because it's a competing worldview with Christianity. It's a competing worldview. It stands as another worldview option amongst all the religions of the world. Atheistic humanism, atheistic materialism. These are worldviews that people are hearing described in government school as neutral, but there's absolutely nothing neutral about them. We have the same thing. I mean, don't even get us started on like health class or sex education, where you get to choose your own gender. You get to choose your own, I mean, it's basically a buffet of life. You can go through and choose what gender you are, what gender you're attracted to. You can choose to sleep with 50 people, 200 people, 1,000 people. It doesn't matter. Well, that's a complete, they act like that's neutral. And if they choose that for them, that's their personal choice. But this goes to the heart of like people's very moral formation. If you tell a 5-year-old they get to pick their gender, and you tell a 5-year-old they get to pick who they're attracted to, and as a fluid concept, and you tell a 5-year-old they can sleep with 40 people, 50 people, 200 people, 500 people, and do all sorts of things, and it'll be totally fine, and your life will be great. That's a totally secular worldview. It's not neutral at all. It forms the moral character of that child in a way specifically that they are not neutral in any way about anything, because they have to believe that about themselves now because they were told it during the years of moral formation, during the most critical years of figuring out who you are, why you exist. What's sold as neutrality, sexual ethics are a buffet and you get to pick and choose what you want. It's not neutral at all. It actually deforms the moral character of a child at a very young age. It's absolutely part of a worldview, absolutely part of a religion. And when you have like, here, this is my last one. I could do literally 50 of these, but I'm going to just do one more. But it's the idea in the in civics class, in government class, they learn, religion and politics, they shouldn't mix. And you hear this trickle down into Facebook comments, and you see this trickle down into society where people say things like, well, you shouldn't bring business or you shouldn't bring politics into business. If you should just bake the cake. You see that trickle down all the way into society. But it's the idea that the government should never have anything to do with religion. Well, that right there is a religious idea. That right there is a secular idea of secularism. That's an ism, right? It's a worldview. That's a tenet. That's what they're saying is government and other religions shouldn't mix, but government and secularism should. They are asserting their worldview, secularism, should stand above all other worldviews. And the way they do that is by saying, no, we can't have religion mixed into our politics. That's a tenet of their own secularism, their own worldview. And so they have they've cut off at the knees. So many millions of Christian kids have heard since they were 5, 6, 7 years old in government school that you can't mix religion and politics. They've been trained in a not neutral, but totally secularism world to believe that you can't mix religion and politics. But that very idea is mixing religion and politics. That the whole concept is religious in nature. It's just part of the religion of secularism. And so we have to recognize there's absolutely nothing that anyone does on planet Earth ever is really truly neutral. It's all informed by their worldview. It's all informed by who is the foundational source of truth. Now, for the secular humanists, the atheistic materialists, the secularists, for all these people, at the very end of the day, of all these pagan religions or these competing religions that are in our government school classrooms, that are in every single class all the time because they're in the textbooks, because these textbook authors and publishers are neutral, right? Because of that, we have to recognize, first of all, there is no such thing as neutrality. There is no such thing as parents can send their kids off to, Miss Susie at the public school, and their kid's going to come home with a neutral worldview. And then mom and dad, in an hour a week at Sunday school, are going to infuse religion. That's not how it works. That's not how it works. Every class, every day, every single school in every single place in this country is teaching your kids a worldview. You are giving them 1 hour a week. I mean, maybe not you, but most parents are giving them 1 hour a week of Sunday school and, some basic, they might pray before meals or, whatever. They have like a place in their lives for Christianity. Recognize that in government school, you're giving them an hour or two a week of Christian instruction, hoping that the neutral school is leaving your kids a blank slate to put this Christianity on top of. And in reality, they're getting 40 to 50 hours a week minimum of secular education and secular worldview. And you're trying to undo that with an hour or two a week. It's just not going to work.
So the next time your mother-in-law asks, why are you homeschooling? You could just say all that.
They're real fun at parties, man.
You can just
clip homeschool party. Yeah.
Yeah. You could just clip that. This is the why behind what I do.
Right. Well, I think there's a lot of homeschoolers that are homeschooling right now that, I mean, when I was a kid, and I know I'm on the older end of this, but when I was a kid, all the homeschool workshops and or, the magazines and the books were all about, the worldview, because everyone was homeschooling for a Christian worldview, for a Christian reason. Now I think we have, literally probably millions of people homeschooling that they are, Christian, they profess to be Christian, but they haven't thought about the worldview angle nearly so much as they were escaping the bad school. And then once they've escaped, now they're having the chance to sit and look and go, what do I believe? Why do I believe it? And so I think, even though this may be old hat to some folks that have homeschooled for a long time, I think it needs to be restated for younger homeschoolers, especially because, if you don't stop to think about why you think what you think, you're probably not going to necessarily know how to go where you want to go. I guess that's.
Well, I think it's important, like you said, we have a lot of new homeschoolers in this space since COVID. And so, even if you don't share all those same beliefs, say you're not a Christian, but you can look back in history and go, the world was a lot better 30, 40 years ago when society in general agreed on these Christian tenets. So even if you don't believe yourself, you can sit there and go, things have only gone downhill the farther we've gone down this rabbit trail.
Here's a perfect example of exactly that. Is they want neutral moral instruction in government school. Neutrality, right? So they have these posters on all the walls. Be kind. Respect everyone.
Right.
But those concepts in their worldview are fluid. What does respect look like? Now respect, today respect looks like, pronoun usage, furries, don't meow at the furry. I mean, that's a real story. You can Google that. A student got disciplined by the school district because he meowed back at a furry, in their classroom. And it's like, respect everyone looks like what? It looks like, of course, tolerate everything, but also affirm things that are really deeply unwell in some of these kids. And it's like, taking this as a non-Christian homeschooler listening to this podcast, which you probably wouldn't have gotten all this way, but thank you for sticking around. But taking that concept of be kind, respect everyone, what does that mean today? And why does it mean that? Well, today, respect everyone means tolerate everything, affirm their choices, no matter how self-destructive they might be, or no matter how, the consequences of them. Well, if you back that up to 50 years ago, when people said respect each other and be kind, what did they mean then? Well, 50, 75, 100 years ago, when they said those words, those were based on biblical principles. What is kindness? Well, sometimes kindness is saying the truth in love. Sometimes kindness is not affirming someone when they're making a decision that could harm them, or make it more likely their future is very unhappy. It's like, see, that's the trouble with neutral, moralistic, education, is you don't have to be a Christian to recognize that unhooking our morality from the Bible has made it all totally fluid. And so we can't really teach kids to be kind unless, again, we go back to this individualistic kindness for me is X or Y. Kindness for you is totally different. It's like how, so that's, if you want totally fluid definitions and totally individualistic ethics, you can go ahead and unhook them from the Christian foundation that gave those words meaning. The trouble is you end up where we are. So if you're a homeschooler who's not a Christian, who's saying, well, I just totally disagree with the Bible, recognize that unhooking morality from a foundational truth like Scripture makes it totally individualistic and totally fluid. And so it's really difficult to tell your kids, you must be kind, and kindness looks like this. They're going to grow up and eventually go, well, I've decided for me, kindness looks like something else. I'm going to do the opposite.
I think that's the encouragement, if you're watching and you're homeschooling and you're kind of drowning with 3, 4, 5 kids, and Tuesday's lesson looks terrible, and so-and-so hit such and such kid. Yeah, it's like, it gets to be every day is kind of a grind sometimes. And so that is our encouragement to you, is that what you're doing is shaping souls. What you're doing is going to change the face of this country, period. Because, like I said before, nothing matters more than education. If the government school system is who is cranking out millions of messed up kids who need drugs to sit still, all those kinds of things, then what you're doing is the exact opposite, right? What you're doing is directly impacting the next generation. You are directly making it so that my kids, all of our kids, get to live in a much better world, because you're raising morally responsible kids who actually know real history, and hey, they could even read, that's always a plus. Like kids that can read,
they imagine that you are creating a world as a homeschool mom where when our grandkids are arguing on the internet, everyone in the conversation has a reading level above 5th grade. I mean, that would change the world.
Right. Like, hey, your kid can read in cursive. Nobody's been able to do that for 20 years in the system. So take that encouragement. What you are doing matters, and it's not a small thing. And again, just even you pulling them out of that broken system, you're already instilling them with much better values just by the fact that they're around you, who love them the most, you care about them the most, you brought them into this world, and nobody cares about them the way that you do. So take that for what it is. It matters, and it's not a small thing.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us, everyone. Sorry that I go off on tangents. That's kind of just, you were saying earlier about the daily grind of homeschooling, and I was thinking, man, penmanship is just a daily grind around here. I don't care how many different curriculums we've tried. It's just going to be a thing. And then as I was thinking that, as you said that, I thought, part of it is we're a very verbal family. And so here in my house, there's a lot of, we talk about why we do things, why other people do things. We talk a lot about, there are days where we don't get schoolwork done, and we do just sit on the couch and read books out loud and call it literature class, just because, hey, this is all I can do right now. But, recognize that is forming the character of my child, and they're not having to fight off bullies. They're not having to fight off, radical worldviews. So even on the days where all I'm doing is, reading a book out loud to my kids and calling that school for the day, we're still killing it. We're still killing it. So anyway, to wrap this up, thank you for joining. If you haven't yet, subscribe, share our content with your friends or in your homeschool groups. We'd really appreciate that. If you have questions, follow-up questions, worldview questions, if you strongly disagree with something we said, or strongly agree, we'll always take agreement. Feel free to comment. We'd love to hear what other homeschool, especially younger homeschool moms, are thinking. I'm always interested to hear what is motivating people to homeschool and what they are thinking about homeschooling once they're just getting started. What's the worldview that's going on here? I'd love to hear what y'all are interested in. And then the next thing is, I know, stay tuned, because I think next week we're going to talk about what it means for homeschooling to see the Department of Education dismantled, and what it means and what it doesn't mean. And I think that'll be interesting for folks. So join us next week.